I'm going to give you the punchline right from the beginning. Specialty crop lending isn't drastically different than any other kind of ag or commercial lending. It's really not. You got to be able to prove that you got cash flow to make loan payments and you got collateral to secure a loan. And so that's, I mean, the secret sauce is not that secret. As my buddy Bjorn, the maple tapper, likes to say, it's not rocket surgery. That said, I will get into some of the nuances. I will try to do any demystification, I think, is what our objective is here this morning. So specialty crop lending, I'm Andy Larson. Farm Outreach Specialist is my title. I'm with the Food Finance Institute at UW. I also report to the folks in the Small Business Development Center. This is our shop here, and website foodfinanceinstitute.org. Our job is to help farms and food businesses get the money that they need to grow. Like literally, we try to work with you in order to help prep you to get loans, to get grants, to get cost shares, to get private equity raised, all that kind of stuff. That is our job. We are measured by how much money we can get into people's hands and how many jobs we help create or retain in the state of Wisconsin. Please use us as a resource. Tara Johnson here on the upper left is the boss lady. She has been a serial entrepreneur in a number of different food and farm enterprises, usually surrounding dairy and dairy products. Brad Rostowski is one of the other people that runs our food and beverage capacity building accelerator here. Some of my perspective that I will provide today is going to come from this. This is my, couple acres of pasture, my wife, and a sampling of our laying hens out back on grass. This is not right now, obviously. We have about 600 birds at the peak of the season in order to be able to supply restaurants and retail stores and one farmer's market that my wife goes to weekly. We do have loans for this operation. Specialty crop or not, I mean, free range brown eggs may not be a crop, they may be a livestock product, but you got some of the same questions and limitations that you run across in lending to this as you would to any other specialty ag enterprise. The way that I would describe my farm, so if you think of a continuum, on one side, you've got a hobby, and on the other side, you've got a business, right? Okay, and so a hobby is kind of designed to take up your time and take up your money, but provide you with a lot of enjoyment. A business is designed to take up your time and make you money and hopefully provide you with some enjoyment in the process, right? Okay, so you got these two bookends of the spectrum. I would say that my farm is somewhere sort of right in the middle. I'd characterize it kind of as a lifestyle business. We do make money, we do pay taxes, but it's not like we employ a bunch of people. It's not like it would be the only thing that we could do, which is why I'm working for the U. So keep that in mind, that my perspective is probably pretty similar to a lot of yours. I know we've got some people on the call that are the hobbyier side, some people on the call that are the businessier side. So I will try to speak to both of those as we go along here today. And yes, we have experienced some of the interesting changes and pivots that everybody else has, given the whole pandemic situation we've had in the past year. We have lost some restaurant customers. We have expanded some of our retail marketing. It's all been very interesting. So this is kind of basically what I want to hit on today. 5 questions. Couple minutes each, couple bullet points under each one. It's going to be a pretty simplistic presentation. How do I know it's time for a loan? Is it just when I run out of money? Not necessarily. What are you going to do with it? How are you going to choose that lender that you go with, or bank of lenders? You could go with more than one person easily. What information will the bank need? That speaks to Jesse's question a little bit more. Why do we need so much stuff? What does the bank do with all this stuff? How is the sausage made? And we can talk in as much detail as you like to about that. How long will that credit decision take? The answer is always too long, but I will tell you why. And what should I do now in order to be more bankable later? If I'm not at the point where I'm going and pursuing loans in order to grow my maple business, what are some of the things that I can do to be ready for it when the time comes? Okay, how do I know it's time for a loan? Checkbook's empty, right? No. That's generally not when you want to go after a loan, unless it's because you have invested all of your personal resources and capital into a growing and flourishing business. Okay, the reason to get a loan is because you're trying to seize a growth opportunity for the business. For example, if you have the opportunity to get in with a new customer, one of the reasons, okay, we went into business in the spring of 2014 with our egg enterprise, and we doubled our flock in 2015, and we needed a loan in order to double our flock and double our capacity. The reason we were getting at that is because we had the opportunity to get into some additional retail stores, some additional restaurants. We did not accurately measure what the demand would be in our local marketplace, and so we needed to grow. As a result, the year before, we'd used some personal capital, some money that we had saved up. We used some family resources, some investment, I guess you'd say, private equity from my wife's family. And then the second year, as we were growing, we needed to start to go outside of that sort of very, very hyper-local family network in order to grow into a larger business. So, if you are got a couple years under your belt, you got some production records under your belt, you got some financial records under your belt. I'm going to mention records a lot today. So this is kind of a chance to do a bit of a self-check as to whether or not you're keeping enough in the way of financial records. So you see an opportunity in the marketplace, for example, for maple bacon donuts. I wish that's what Jesse was giving us virtually for breakfast this morning. I don't know how that would work exactly. But the time to get a loan is not when you make your first donut or tap your first tree. It's when you've been in the marketplace, you've been testing whether or not there's a demand for this thing. Obviously, there's a demand. And you want to get into a partnership with a donut maker in order to distribute these things region-wide. Okay, that's a lending opportunity. You want to, and I know that this Tapped in Canada thing is going to get me some, thumbs downs in the reactions. Sorry. It's just a free picture that I found. So this person had an opportunity to get some sparkling tree water onto the marketplace. I'm sure they had to invest in a canning line. They had to invest some small amount of money in a graphic designer for their cans. So this is the time when you want to be looking for a loan, not at the first moment of startup. The other thing that's a good indication that you could use a bank's resources is you have a bottleneck, which is defined by capital. And I'm talking about working capital. You need more cash on a daily basis to pay employees, in order to purchase packaging, in order to have inventory or physical capital. You need some additional acres of sugar bush. You need some equipment. You need a bigger truck in order to be able to haul it to market. Those capital constraints are appropriate reasons to go after a loan. It is not going to help you fix management or market constraints. If your business is in need of money because you're having trouble figuring out what kind of products specifically are going to work best in the market, where your marketplace is, where your customer is, what they're going to pay, those market constraints are not going to be fixed by getting a loan. That's the kind of thing that you should have as figured out as possible before you go in and talk to a lender at a bank. Probably heard of this little saying before, the 5 C's. This is sort of a self-test to determine whether or not your 5 C's look good before you go into a bank. So these are things that every banker is going to test either explicitly or implicitly as you go in and talk to those folks. Capacity, cash flow is going to be probably your first and most important thing. You have to be able to demonstrate, particularly using records, using balances, using tax returns, using P&Ls from the past years, that you're going to have the money available to make payments when they're due. Now, bankers can work with you to make those payments due at a time when your cash flow is flowing rather than ebbing. So, for example, you can describe how exactly you are moving your maple products into the marketplace, at what prices, at what profit margins, and saying, okay, this is the time of year when I'm going to have the most cash available to make payments. Let's concentrate, instead of having a level payment monthly all year round, let's concentrate and have one big balloon, or not a balloon, but a larger order payment at a particular time of year, and then smaller order payments monthly or quarterly or semi-annually. Ag banks in particular are used to working with endeavors that are more seasonal. So they will have some familiarity with loan structures that are outside of sort of your typical once a month installment kind of thing. So cash flow. And on the right-hand side, you see that image. This is how a person in a bank is generally going to determine whether or not you have the cash flow to service that loan. They're going to look at your personal income. They're going to look at, Jesse's wife's income, right? The business, the personal income in addition to the business income. Specifically, when you're working with ag lending, a lot of time there's one spouse that works on the farm, one spouse that works off the farm, has the W-2 job with the benefits. Those two things together, that global perspective, is going to be more of an indicator of your repayment capacity than just what the farm is producing by itself. Also, lenders are generally going to add back the non-cash expenses. What am I referring to in particular? Depreciation. Depreciation is not a cash expense. That is how much the value of your market value of your equipment goes down in any particular year. It's a book value. It is, no one's ever written a check for depreciation. So we add that back and consider that as part of your cash flow availability. Take out your family living expenses, take out your tax burden, take out your current debt repayments, and that's what you have available to make loan payments. Family living expenses are notoriously squishy. Okay, pretty much every bank has to factor them in. Pretty much every bank has a different formula for how they figure that thing. They range anywhere from a default value of $40,000 for a family of four to $80,000. Which one of those is more accurate really depends on the business, on the area of the country, all those different things. So make sure if you have a question about this calculation, this arithmetic that the banker is doing, talk with them about family living expenses and the number that they're putting in as a placeholder. Capital, skin in the game. The old saying goes, in this particular breakfast, the chicken's involved, but the pig is committed, right? The bank wants to know that you're committed. What that means is that a bank is generally not going to lend you 100% of the value of a particular purchase. It's not going to lend you every dollar that you need in order to do a project. They want to know that it's not just their money at risk. You as an entrepreneur, as a farmer, as a maple producer are going to have some cash that you've contributed to that operation over the course of the previous years. Keep track of that, what it is that you've put into the business, and can use that as sort of an equity contribution. If there's other collateral that you can put up, if you're trying to buy, an additional number of acres, you have some existing acres that you can put into that transaction as collateral, and that would be an equity contribution to the transaction. So be aware that the bank doesn't want to be the only one at risk in a lending project. Collateral security. No one likes this, but everybody needs it. Collateral is what the bank will take back if you default on your loan. That is the thing that you pledge as the security for if a loan cannot get paid back. You're going to give this thing to the bank in order for them to sell it and make themselves whole. All right. Not exactly a dirty little secret, but it's dirty. Nobody likes to talk about it that much. Thing that helps on the collateral side. So I, as a specialty business, have a pretty low capital overhead. I've got some portable net fence. I've got some I've got some egg washing equipment, washing and sorting type of equipment. I have an old UTV that's not worth a whole heck of a lot. The bank isn't super excited about me defaulting on my ag loans because they don't want to have to sell my weird stuff if they don't have to in order to make themselves whole. So consider in a maple operation, if you're getting a loan in order to get into a bunch of tubing and an RO system, consider whether or not that bank is going to understand how they could market those assets in a default situation. If that is not an approvable piece of collateral for them, think about something that they understand. Think about ag equipment. Think about a truck. Think about a whatever that's easy enough to move in a liquidation scenario. Character, credit history. A bank's going to pull your credit report. In commercial credit and ag credit, it's not as important your actual score. People aren't as worried about, whether you've got a 670 or a 720, although those things are really nice. If you see a 720 or an 800, you're pretty sure that person's going to make good on their debts because they always have. But what that bank is more often than not going to want to see in a commercial lending environment is, have you always made good on your loans? Do you have a history of making those payments on time without a lot of lates, without any bankruptcies, without any other kind of problems that a credit report can show? So the credit history is more than just a number, especially in commercial and agricultural lending. Last but not least, conditions, the current business environment. As you can imagine, the current business environment does make a difference as to what a bank is going to want to lend into. In the past year, I have the feeling that there were not a lot of new loans that were made from new creditors into the movie theater business, into the fancy indoor dining restaurant business, into some of those things that have really taken a bit, hotels, taken a beating as a result of the pandemic. So are those things going to be external conditions that a bank could say no as a result of? And the bank has every right to say no as a result of those conditions. So those are your 5 C's. You hear about those things all the time. That's kind of what they mean in a little bit more detail, maybe more than you wanted. But keep those things in mind. When you're going to a bank, make sure you have a growth opportunity. Make sure that you have a little bit of history under your belt so they understand how you do what you do, and make sure your 5 C's look good. How do you choose that lender? So there's a ton of banks out there, you guys. There's a ton of them. Even if you get a no from one bank, that doesn't mean you're going to get a no from the next one. They specialize in different things. Well, okay, let's get into this in slide order here. If you have a local bank in your town, your family's been there for a bazillion years, the lender knows you, the bank president knows you, knows your dad, knows you're good for it, you're a known quantity, so to speak, with that institution, that's oftentimes a good enough reason to go into a bank and get a loan with a lender there. Are they specializing necessarily in specialty agriculture and agriculture at all? Will they make a loan to a maple business? Don't know. But if you're a known quantity, and if your family history in the area makes you very, very likely to make your payments, that's probably going to be somebody you can work with. Now, there's also a good chance that you don't necessarily have a bank in your town that has that particular specialty. Maybe it's a credit union that doesn't do as much in the commercial or ag space. The bank that I worked for was much more emphasized on commercial and ag and less on the consumer side of things. So making a house loan was more time consuming and difficult than it was to make an ag loan. So different banks specialize just like any other business in any other industry. So it's easy enough to figure out with a pretty short conversation whether or not this is going to be something that is easy to pull off at this lending institution, or if it's difficult to pull off at this lending institution just because they're not used to it. So make sure that you fit the specialty. You want to see somebody that deals in commercial ag, somebody that deals in small business, somebody that works with the FSA or the SBA for credit enhancements. We can talk more about that if you'd like to, but fit within that bank's box to some extent, even if you are a slightly outside the box business. So you also got to consider what motivates a lender, right? And how bogged down they are in other stuff. I got to tell you, last year really sucked because we did a lot of PPP loans that were really small margin, really small dollar, but took an immense amount of time. And it was kind of, I don't know, government mandated isn't the right way, but government promoted. And so that really kind of gave us a service crunch as to whether or not we could get the other stuff that we had in the hopper done. So there's a time consideration. There's an interest consideration. If your lender that you're speaking to doesn't seem to be at all interested in ag, in specialty crops, in food businesses, in any of those type of things, maybe it's not a perfect fit. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with not doing a business relationship that's going to be strained in the future. Motivation is a consideration. What motivates a banker? Credit quality, credit quantity. Okay, credit quality means that you are a great borrower, you have no troubles, you're easy to take care of. You make that loan, you put it on the shelf, you never worry about it again. That's credit quality. Credit quantity is what helps a banker gets paid their bonus at the end of the year. All right, I made X million dollars worth of loans over this year, and I get Y% of that to make my bonus. So if you're a marginal credit risk and you're going in and you're asking for a $5,000 loan on some collateral that the banker doesn't understand, it's going to be possibly harder to make that match with a lender just due to motivation. There is somebody out there eventually that you'll encounter that is going to be motivated to do it, that's going to have the time to do it, maybe work with a junior lender who needs to build their book and build their customer base for the future. Okay. Everybody hates the amount of homework that they got to do for the bank. You got to bring in a lot of information. This is the thing that I want you to remember. The bank isn't asking you for all that information because they think you're going to screw them. Okay? That you're going to default on your loan, that you're not going to make your payments, whatever. The bank is asking for all that information because they have been screwed in the past. Okay? They are in the CYA business. Okay, they have had troubled credit that they've had to work out. They've experienced that. They're a financial institution. They see that thing on a regular basis where you have to figure out how to fix what's become a credit problem. All of the information and documentation that you're bringing are to show that you're not one of those people, that your idea is good, and that your bank, that your loan is not going to be a credit problem for them in the future. So just to give you a little bit of an indication of how a bank uses all that homework that you bring in, tax returns. Okay, yes, it's helpful to show the entire tax return to your banker, okay? Because as we talked about before, they want to see your business income, your Schedule C, your Schedule F, your profit and loss from business or farming. For the Maple enterprise, they're going to want to see that. Or if you have another farm enterprise that you're doing, they're going to want to see other income, off-farm income, as well. There are a lot of people who are bankable because of off-farm income and off-farm benefits. So if a bank is looking at you as a global picture, trying a global repayment analysis, that off-farm income does certainly make a difference in your repayment capacity. They want to see the trends. So they're probably going to ask you for 2 to 3 years worth of tax returns or profit and loss statements. Why do they need so much? Well, 2 points is a line, 3 points is a trend. They want to kind of figure out how your business is changing over time. If you're increasing or decreasing over time, look at your expenses, see what have been your main expense areas over the course of the past 3 years. Also see that you've paid taxes, you know approximately the tax burden is going to be. If you've had major shifts in depreciable assets, you can tell that from the capital gains and losses. They'll also probably take a look at your depreciation schedules and make sure some of the equipment that you rail off on your balance sheet is also matching up with stuff on your tax return. Bankers can glean a lot of information from that tax return, and they're going to be much happier if you let them see the whole thing as opposed to, here's the front page of my 1040 and that's all you need to know. We're not really in a that's all you need to know environment anymore, even in ag lending. And people kind of decry that, they're sad that it's not a handshake and a smile anymore, but it's also a more litigious society. There's a lot more, trust but verify out there, especially in the lending world. A balance sheet, and I'm not expecting you to see these spreadsheets on there. This is just a very basic visual example of what you're looking at here. A balance sheet is what you own and what you owe. They call it a balance sheet because on one side you got all your assets, on the other side you have all your liabilities, and that should equal out with your net worth so that those two sides are equal. We can get into that some other time, or you can watch a YouTube video on how to do it. Suffice it to say that a bank needs a balance sheet for a couple of different reasons. They need to know, for one, what you own that's available for collateral. If you're offering up your truck, for example, as collateral on a Maple business loan, but your truck already has a big loan from GM or from the local credit union or whatever against it, they may not be able to use that thing as adequate collateral for the loan that you seek. So what is available of your assets for collateral? What is your working capital position? Working capital is simply cash. What is my liquid assets minus my liabilities that are going to be coming due within the space of the next year? Current assets minus current liabilities equals working capital, okay? They want to know that you have the cash to get through your upcoming obligations. Lending opportunities, sure, a bank's going to use a balance sheet as an opportunity to seek new business. If you have a mortgage and that mortgage doesn't appear to them to be at a desirable rate, maybe they'll offer to refinance. Yeah, they're going to seek other business opportunities with your balance sheet. Last but not least, your net worth is on there. Your debt ratio, debt to asset ratio, your debt to income ratio, there's like 16 or 22 ratios that any banker is familiar with and calculates at least some of those things when they're underwriting a loan. So all that stuff's going to come off the balance sheet. So that's why you need tax returns. That's why you need a balance sheet. The third sort of piece of paper, homework paper that you need to bring in is your cash flow projection. What is a cash flow projection? That's what I'm going to make and what I'm going to pay out in cash over the course of the upcoming 12 months, 3 years, 5 years, whatever. You'll hear the term pro forma. This is another term for a projection. This is a way for you to demonstrate at what points in the year you're going to have cash coming in, when there's going to be a cash crunch. So for example, if you have a lot of expenses in August and your income doesn't show up until November, in the case of, for example, a lot of crop farmers in Illinois, then that's a good reason for a bank to provide a revolving line of credit for you to be able to weather some of those ebbs and flows in cash and get through the end of the crop year. It'll influence your loan structure. As we mentioned before, scheduling payments at a time when your cash is at a flow rather than an ebb is going to be a great thing as well. Most bankers are going to have the flexibility to do an irregular payment schedule and match up with a cash flow that's going to work best for your operation. And last but not least, a cash flow projection. Okay, so you're getting this new loan, right? This new loan has an outcome. You want this new loan to do a thing. You want it to grow your business. You want it to grow your revenues. Is there going to be cash coming in from a loan? Obviously at the beginning, yes. So what is it going to do as far as your revenues and your repayment capacity later? Last but not least, I'm going to say detailed plan. I'm not going to say business plan, because when I say business plan, that is the reaction I get. I don't want to do a business plan. Okay, it's fine. Most of my customers, 90% of my customers came into the bank without a business plan, like, a 3-ring binder with all of their stuff in it. However, they had an idea what they wanted to do. They can articulate it very clearly in both narrative and numbers. And they gave me what I needed as far as financial statements in order to build some predictions for a credit presentation. So you got to talk about you, what you've done, what you've contributed, your experience, your qualifications, the current business situation, the opportunity that you're trying to grow into, and what you need in order to be able to seize upon that opportunity. All right, so that's your detailed plan. Can it be a business plan in a 3-ring binder that's all laminated and pretty? Yes. Can it be sort of a long-ranging conversation with a lender where they take a lot of notes and write some narrative down for the credit presentation later? Yes. Both of those ways are options. Either way, you're going to come out with some of the smatterings of a business plan. Okay? And maybe that work with your banker is also going to help you be prepared for business plan pitches, later on in your career. All right, I already gave you the punchline on this one. How long will the credit decision take? It's going to take longer than you expect. All right, it just does. It's consumer loans where all you need is a credit score and a W-2, a pay stub or whatever. And that entire credit decision is based on a number. They can be done online. They can be done with AI. They can be done with, without involving a lot of people. It's just risk. It's just risk models, right? I can go onto the and I've done this. I've gone onto the Discover Bank website, right? I have a Discover card, so I go onto the Discover website, say, personal loan, I want to buy my truck from my brother. It's something I did. I went on there and it's like, 7 minutes, one phone call, a credit check, and I have the money that I need in order to buy that truck. Simple. They get, X collateral at Y rate, and there's never a person, there's never a bank visit. Super simple, okay? If you're talking about growing a business, and especially if you're talking about growing a business that's a little bit outside the box from what a bank is used to lending to, okay, that might be a little bit less automated, a little bit less numbers only. The person's going to need to get to know you, get to know your business, get to know what you're planning on doing. That stuff takes time. There's always going to be some upfront back and forth between especially between a new lender and a new customer, to get to know that person and that banking relationship. There are some other, things that are sort of policy driven that it's hard to work outside of. So the size of your credit request is going to determine who ultimately does the underwriting and who gets to make the decision. If it's a small request, oftentimes your lender, the person you're talking to across the desk, gets to make that decision. They can do it on their authority. If it gets bigger, then you usually have to have more sets of eyes over it. At my old bank, it was over $250,000. You had to bring it to loan committee. Over $500,000, you had to bring it to the directors. All right. So there's different levels of approval that are going to be likely depending on the size of the bank. So keep that in mind, that those things add a little bit of time to the process. How complicated is your credit request? Is it just a loan to you or you and your spouse? That's not too bad. If you're going to talk about a loan to an LLC, and that LLC has 4 member owners, each of which are 25%, or there's another entity that has some ownership with, if it's publicly traded. I mean, if you get into any of this entity complexity, if you get into those things where it gets harder for a simple-minded banker to wrap their arms around the full lending situation, that adds to the time. That adds to the legwork that the bank has to do. If the information that you provided was complete, that's going to reduce the amount of backing and forthing that the new lender has to do with the new customer. Oftentimes, there's going to be questions. At every level of approval, there's going to be questions. And every new set of eyes, somebody's going to see something that the loan officer didn't see, and they're going to have to come back to you and answer questions. It feels annoying. It feels like you're, tilling the same ground over and over and over again, but it's a new person with a new perspective and a new set of questions that comes along with the credit that you're asking for. So be patient with that process, provide the answers that they request, provide it on a timely basis, and they're going to feel like that's a good indicator that this person is a got it together type of businessman, businesswoman, and is going to be a good credit risk as well. Last but not least, how full is the pipeline at the bank? Okay, if it's an ag bank, at renewal season, when you're renewing farmers' lines of credits, things are busy. All right, so you're going to have to give the banker some latitude to say, all right, this is going to take me 2 weeks or 3 weeks before I can actually get to this thing and get the decision made at the different levels. Okay, be prepared for that time period. If you're at a situation where there's historically low interest rates, think about how many mortgage refinances came through our conventional credit institutions in the past year. That really filled up a lot of people's pipelines as well. New high demand programs. The PPP loans took up all sorts of man hours at our bank last year, and I'm assuming that it's taking them up again now at this point this year. So be aware that when it's crunch time for another reason, it just adds to the amount of time that it's going to take to get you a good, thoroughly researched credit decision. Finally, there is some non-bank legwork that needs to be done in certain credit situations. If you're buying real estate, there's got to be title work. There's got to be an appraisal. The appraisers take a couple, 3 weeks in order to get out there and write up their report and all that kind of stuff. So be aware of those kind of deadlines. If you're working with an outside organization, if you're working with the Farm Services Agency, FSA, you're doing a participation loan where the bank takes half the loan and the FSA does half the loan. Great program, reduces the amount of equity you have to put in, reduces your overall interest rate, takes a little bit of extra time to underwrite because you've got a whole nother organization set of eyes that has to go over this thing. If you're working with the SBA, the Small Business Administration, that is another great credit enhancement, especially for new business people who don't have a whole ton of collateral. The SBA's lending programs were designed for people who don't have adequate collateral to secure a larger order loan, and they can help make up some of that shortfall using their guarantees. All right. What a guarantee is, and this is, if it's wonky language, I'm sorry. A guarantee is basically an outside entity saying, we're going to take Mr. or Mrs. Banker, we're going to take that risk with you. You as the bank get to be in first position, lien position. You're going to be the first in line if there's a default situation. We as the guaranteeing organization are going to take a second position. If there's anything left, we'll take that to make ourselves whole. And that second position guarantee is what gives the bank certainty that they're not going to be left holding the bag if anything goes sideways. There's oftentimes, like I said, a time component and a fee component to those guarantees, and the lender is not going to pay that fee. You, as the borrower, are going to pay that fee. Be aware of that, but don't dismiss it out of hand, because sometimes it's a great way to get a loan made that otherwise might not have been made in-house at the bank. So consider those things, be willing to pay for those things. Work with if you think you're going to need one of those credit enhancements, work with a lender that's familiar with the process. All right, I got just a couple of minutes here, and I'm going to race through a couple of these things. This is kind of one of those internet lists, right? 6 things you can do to be more bankable later. Well, here's 6 things that you can do to be more bankable later. You're not walking into a bank yet, but you're thinking, okay, I'm growing this maple business. I want to be able to access capital in the not too distant future. What are some things I can do to be more bankable later? First and foremost, treat your business like a business. Separate your personal and your business checking accounts at the very least. If you have a business checking account, you can go back through, you can see the deposits, you can see the withdrawals, you can kind of recreate your revenues and expenses if you haven't been a good record keeper over the course of the past year or two, depending on how long your bank keeps your transaction record. So separate business and personal. If you're going to take money out of your business for personal reasons to make ends meet at the end of the month, take a draw. Notate that as a draw from the business. It is not an expense that you're going to be able to write off at the end of the year on your taxes. It is money that you used as income to cover family living. Keep better records and financial statements. Unfortunately, there's a million different ways that you can do this. Keeping good records can be something as simple as keeping a pocket pal in your chest pocket there and writing down the expenses you have over the course of any given day, on up to something that is a NetSuite or a QuickBooks or a very full-fledged, business accounting suite. What I've found is that people at the sort of mid-scale, the lifestyle business, the semi-serious enterprise kind of people, they're going to have good luck with creating their own spreadsheets in certain situations. I use Google Sheets, for example, as a way that I can update my spreadsheet on my phone. Like, this is how many eggs we got out of the birds today. This is the amount of shrink that we had. This is the amount of dozens we had for sale. Now, that's all production records. You got to keep your marketing records as well. How many you sold, at what price, have an invoicing system to keep track of those things, and use whatever is going to become a fast twitch, second nature part of your workflow. That's what's most important about keeping your records and updating your financial statements. By the way, your financial statements that we discussed earlier, make a balance sheet every December 31st. Your banker is going to love to see that, because that way every year on the same day, they know they have that snapshot in time of your assets and liabilities, and they can do what they call accrual accounting based on that. Don't consider yourself an island. Assemble a support team. Have a tax accountant. Have a banker. Have an attorney. Have an extension agent. Have a dork from Food Finance Institute helping you out. Don't consider yourself an island. This is a complicated venture. Farming is not a simple thing. It isn't now. It probably wasn't before. have a support team that's helping you with the different aspects of your operation. You don't have to know every single thing about running a business and running a farm if you can hire in some of that expertise. Know your cost of production. There's nothing more frustrating to a banker than telling them what price you charge and them going through a rigorous exercise to figure out what your costs are in each per unit number and finding out that you're charging less than what it's costing you to produce. Many people aren't aware necessarily of their cost of production and whether they're making any profit margin on an individual product. They just know whether or not there's money left in the checking account at the end of the month or the end of the year. So keep that in mind. Here are the allergy. Okay. Income taxes are a thing that nobody likes, right? There are a lot of small business persons who are able to, let's call it, optimize their tax burden by showing more or less expenses or more or less revenues. Paying income taxes is a good problem to have. It means you made money. It means you had revenues higher than expenses. Is the government going to get a cut of it? Yes. Is that an illogical thing if you need something for the business? Perhaps. But be aware that the objectives of your tax person and the objectives of your banker can sometimes be in conflict with one another. Your tax person wants you to find as many expenses as you can in order to optimize your tax burden, right? And if you show a loss, then you don't have any tax obligation from your farming enterprise and you walk away a happy person. However, you walk into the bank the next day, you bring them that tax return shows a loss at the bottom line. And even after the banker adds back your depreciation, there's still a negative number. That's going to make it look like that farm business isn't producing the revenue it needs in order to have any debt service capacity. It doesn't have extra money to make loan payments. So be very aware of that potential conflict. Don't hide income. Keep an accurate record of the income that's coming into your business, even if it's as simple as cash deposits that are going into a bank account on a weekly basis. The last but not least, if you have a day job and this is a side thing and you're trying to capitalize a maple business while you're working full-time, that's fine. Go ahead and keep that day job for now. That security, that regularity of income is a great thing to have when you're just kind of capitalizing a new business that the banker doesn't understand. All right, because you look like you can make a loan payment based on your W-2 job, and whether or not that other enterprise makes, a positive net revenue at the end of the year, the banker's not going to care because you're still going to make your payments. So at least for the time being, until you know that your business can support an FTE, a full-time equivalent, keep your day job, and you're going to be more bankable that way. I used 3 extra minutes, and I apologize for that, but I would love to entertain any questions that have come through. I talk quickly, and occasionally some bank jargon comes out of my mouth, and I apologize. I would love to make any clarifications that I can, and I would love to hear from you guys in the future if you're trying to get your financial house in order, if you're trying to approach a lender, if you're trying to build any financial capacity from private equity, grants, other things like that. People always ask about grants. Are there grants out there? Sometimes. It's not easy to find grants that support the starting of a private for-profit business. It's just not easy. There's grants out there to do research. There's grants out there to build capacity. There's grants out there to teach other people. Are there grants out there for me to buy equipment? Sometimes. It's usually small, local programs. Sometimes they're related to specialty crop block grants. Those are going to be state specific and they're going to be occasional. If you're bigger and you're looking to build a new enterprise, a new branded product, enter a new marketplace, there are something called the value-added producer grants. They are not for the faint of heart. They are complicated. They require match. They are capital intensive, and they generally require a grant writer to write them for you in order to win. So be aware of those things, but don't think that you're going to rely on free money from the government in order to capitalize a new private for-profit business.
So, Andy, a couple things. First, an anonymous attendee put in there that they love that you mentioned the bank specialties, that they
Yeah.
have specialties. Is there an easy way when I look online at a bank's website to tell, oh man, this is one that I should spend the time because it is an ag friendly lender. So I don't have to do all that legwork walking into the bank and having them look at me like, I have no idea why you're here because you want to talk about maple syrup.
Okay, so what I do when I want to find an ag lender in a geography that I'm unfamiliar with, I call the local FSA office, the Farm Services Agency. The reason I do that is because those FSA lenders and loan managers are going to be making loans in collaboration with ag banks. All right. And those people are going to be able to say, well, in your area, you have X, Y, and Z banks that deal in agriculture and do participations with us. That's a great way to get sort of a short list of ag lenders within your specific geography. Otherwise, it's just kind of based on their marketing materials. Sometimes the website will show that there's a dedicated category towards agriculture, a dedicated category towards small business. If you don't see any mentions of either ag or small business on that bank's website, there's a good chance that maybe they just specialize in the consumer side of things.
Okay. And then, so to follow that, another person asks, how does one qualify for a non-recourse loan and how do they differ? I guess I've never even heard of the term non-recourse loan, Andy.
A non-recourse loan is essentially a commercial loan that gets made to an organization where the bank takes all the risk. Okay, there's not security put up, there's not collateral put up, there's not capital put up in order to help secure that loan for the bank. The answer is, in my experience at a small community bank, you don't get qualified for a non-recourse loan. Those don't happen, at least at the bank I worked for. That's not going to be true universally. We did make unsecured consumer loans. You know, if somebody needed to get through a rough patch and didn't have something to offer, there were unsecured loans, but the lack of collateral meant an escalation in interest rate. If more rates were around the 3 and 4% mark, then you were going to be paying 7 to 9% for an unsecured loan. The bank wants to get paid for the risk that they're going to take. Would you be able to pay enough rate in order to secure an unsecured loan? In order to get an unsecured loan, yeah, it might be possible, but it's going to take a specific kind of financial institution that's used to making loans like that and understands their risks and how they get paid for them.
Okay, so we talk about rates.
Yeah,
I don't even know what a current like specialty crop rate would be. Is it the same as if I was going to buy a house?
No. Generally not. So people use the general 30-year mortgage rate as sort of a dipstick for everything else. And that's really inaccurate, unfortunately. So right now, 30-year fixed rate home mortgage loans, residential home mortgage loans, are at a historically low level. The reason that most banks can offer those loans at such a cheap level is because they are bundling those loans together and they're selling those loans off to Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac in the secondary market. That means that the bank is at less risk and requires less margin in order to pay for that risk. All right. So the 3% loans that you see out there, the 3.5%, the 4%, those historically low interest rates for mortgage rates are great, but they're not going to be reflective of commercial real estate. For example, commercial and agricultural real estate is always going to be, well, I shouldn't say always, is likely to be higher than a residential real estate mortgage because they don't always have an easy secondary market to sell into. Some banks do. Some banks use Farmer Mac. We can go into those specifics later. But the chance of a small business loan, especially for an unfamiliar business, being as low as what you see advertised on TV for a 30-year fixed rate mortgage, virtually nil. You're going to pay more. And the more complicated, the more risky, the business is, the loan proposition is, the higher the rate's going to be. Be aware, rates are negotiable. If a banker comes at you with this loan and this rate, and you say, well, I could do it if the rate was this, and maybe the upfront fee was a little higher, or I'm not going to pay an upfront fee, but I'll take this extra, number of basis points in interest rate in order to cover that. All that stuff is negotiable unless the banker says, this is what we can offer you, take it or leave it.
Okay. So in an industry like Maple, where there's a lot of cash transitions, we still need to be very careful at how we, how do I say this online? Track that dollar. And I'll be honest, I fall into the same category you talked about earlier.
Sure.
I look at the end of the year and I say, oh, geez, I have some profits here. I'm going to go buy a tractor. And then my wife snaps me back to reality and I have to buy a UTV. So I always in my mind say, I don't want to be successful in my business because I have to show, buy a new piece of equipment, buy something so I'm zero. But in reality, I've hurt myself from the lending perspective.
Well, be aware that at the end of the year, if you made some money and you're trying to optimize your tax burden, that's the way I'm going to keep saying it. Yep. Because it's as neutral as a way I can come up with. Buying a piece of capital equipment in order to show that you brought that piece into service in that year and defray some of the revenues that you made, that is a perfectly legal, perfectly moral thing to do, especially if your business needs that piece of capital equipment. There's nothing wrong with that. Sure. That being said, you don't want to get yourself into a credit situation where you have more loan payments due than you really have the capacity to service.
Gotcha.
Be aware that implement dealers, credit card companies, other places that are going to, check your credit score and make that loan, as opposed to going through a more full underwriting process, you're likely to be able to get into a lot more credit than you're able to handle from a payment perspective. So be very aware that, if on 12/31 you're walking into the tractor dealership, unless you're going to pay cash for that thing, you're buying yourself a piece of equipment, a reduction in tax obligation, but also a string of payments that you're going to have to service over the course of the upcoming 1 or 3 or 5 years.
Sure. So somebody just asked us, what are basis points?
Oh, sorry, nerdy banker stuff. A basis point, BIPS, if you've ever seen the acronym pronounced out loud, a basis point is a 100th of a percent. Okay. So when you see that your rate is 4.9%, you could say, I'll pay an additional 5 basis points and pay 4.95 if you'll reduce my upfront fee for this transaction. So that's all a basis point is.
Okay.
Sorry, nerdy banker jargon.
No. All right, Andy. So you've put your contact information there. We have 13 states on the call. Are you just wanting to be flooded with folks from Wisconsin, or are there similar individuals like you in other states?
So we're an interesting animal. We are sort of apart from extension. We're within the university, but we're in a special little category unto ourselves. Are there people exactly like us in other states? Probably not exactly, but are there people that can help you with financial questions in other states? Yes, absolutely. I would say that extension is a great place to start in most of the states that you're in, especially if there is a farm business, farm management, farm economics, whatever you want to call it, type of field specialist that is going to be able to help answer some of these questions. They're oftentimes going to have a similar background to me. They're going to be able to make the kind of analysis and determinations that I would. There are nonprofit economic development organizations that are always helpful. Every state has a small business development center. SBDC is full of people like myself with different histories and different backgrounds. Sometimes you're going to be able to find somebody farm, times you'll be able to find somebody that's small food business, food and beverage. Look into SBDC, see if they have a consultant that fits your needs. Those are two great places to start. Last but not least, if you need somebody, you can't find somebody, let me know, and I'll help you with the legwork to try and get you a consulting relationship that's going to fit you well. I can go out of state on occasion, but you can imagine that my funding leads my charge to be primarily Wisconsin. Can I help folks outside of Wisconsin? I will if I'm able.